The wind hit us like a freight train the moment we crested that ridge. I remember how it roared in my ears, tugging at my pack straps and making every step feel like walking through water. Beside me, Dan squinted into the glare, his hat already long gone to the next county. We'd been on the move since sunrise, tracing an old route we both knew well. At least, we thought we did. The ridge was a narrow one, jagged and exposed, the kind of place where you felt the world fall away on either side. I was fumbling with the GPS, trying to get our bearings, when the screen blinked, froze, and went dark. Dead batteries. "No problem," I'd said, half shouting over the wind. "We've still got the map." But even as I said it, the gust picked up again, snapping at the folded paper in Dan's hands. A second later, it was gone, fluttering over the edge and vanishing like a startled bird. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring after it, both of us pretending it wasn't as bad as it felt. The ridge stretched ahead, slanting westward, but with the clouds racing overhead and the light shifting so fast, it was hard to tell direction. "Sun's dropping that way," Dan said, nodding toward what might have been southwest. "Trailhead's east. We'll use the sun." It sounded simple, but the air had that restless autumn chill that told me we didn't have much daylight left. We pulled our jackets tight, scanned the sky and started moving. Slow, deliberate, trying not to let the gusts unbalance us. Down from the ridge, the world softened into rolling timber and granite slopes. The pines whispered louder than the wind now, and for a while, it felt like we were finding rhythm again. We picked our way through rock cairns, half buried under moss, trying to remember which ones marked the official trail and which were left by other wanderers. We'd hiked this range twice before, but the land had a way of shifting in memory. What once felt familiar now seemed foreign. The air smelled of wet stone and pine pitch. And, far off, a raven called, echoing like it dipped lower, brushing the trees in amber light. It was time to move again. And from then on, every step was a guess wrapped in confidence. We dropped off the ridge into a maze of spruce and boulders, the kind of country that eats direction for breakfast. The forest swallowed us whole, muting the wind to a steady sigh above the canopy. The sun was our compass now, but its light filtered through the trees in fractured slants, hard to follow. "We keep it on the right? Dan asked, half teasing, half checking his sanity. "Right," I answered, though I wasn't entirely sure anymore. Every ridge we crossed seemed to tilt a different way, and the shadows grew longer by the minute. The terrain rolled and dipped, each valley looking like the last. My boots scuffed against the soft earth layered with needles, and somewhere in the quiet, I realised how easy it was to get turned around when you didn't have a line to follow. Around what I guessed was mid-afternoon, we hit a stream. It wound between slabs of granite and ran clear and cold, a silver ribbon in the shade. I crouched down, cupped a handful of water, and studied the way it flowed. "West," I said. "That's west." Dan raised a brow. "You sure?" I nodded toward the slope where the sun gleamed faintly through the treetops. "Water runs off that ridgeline. That's the one we came down from. If it's flowing west, then downstream's away from camp. We go up." It wasn't science so much as instinct, but it gave us direction. We followed the stream, climbing along its edge, weaving through downed trees and slick moss-covered rocks. An hour later, the forest opened into a clearing, scattered with old fire rings, and the remnants of a log bench. Someone else had camped here once, maybe years ago. I could almost see their tents pitched beneath the same trees, the firelight flickering against bark, now darkened by time. "We're not the first to get turned around out here," I murmured. Dan laughed softly, the sound carrying like a small comfort. We dropped our packs and sat in the quiet, letting the ache settle out, lonely, echoing sound that made the silence feel alive. My boots were heavy with damp earth, but I kept moving, tracing the memory of old routes in my head, trying to match them to this shifting terrain. Every rustle, every broken twig seemed to whisper that night was coming faster than we hoped. Twilight settled over the forest like a slow closing curtain. The last rays of daylight filtered through the branches in narrow shafts of gold, painting the trunks with a fading glow before slipping away entirely. Soon, it was just dim grey all around us. The kind of light where you can't quite tell where the ground ends and the trees begin. Dan was walking a few paces ahead, shoulders tense, his silhouette outlined against the dusk. Every now and then, he'd glance up through the canopy, trying to catch sight of the first star. "Let's find a spot before we break an ankle," he said finally. I agreed. Hiking blind was a good way to get hurt. We found a small rise above a dry wash, cleared some ground and set down our packs. It wasn't much of a campsite, but the earth was level and the wind couldn't reach us here. The air smelled damp and clean, touched with the sweetness of crushed pine needles. As the darkness thickened, the forest began to hum with life again. Crickets, the faint rustle of night creatures, and the faraway yip of a coyote that carried through the trees. We gathered a small pile of dry twigs and struck a spark with the ferro rod I always kept in my kit. The flame caught, slow, hesitant, then flared into a steady glow. The firelight painted Dan's face in orange and shadow, softening the lines that worry had carved there. "We've been worse off," he said, his tone halfway between optimism and a reminder. "Remember that time in the Bitterroots?" I smiled, poking the fire with a stick. "Yeah, we thought we were snowed in. Turns out it was just fog." We talked like that for a while. Old trails, dumb mistakes, near misses that felt funny now but hadn't been then. It helped steady the nerves. After we'd eaten the last of our jerky, I pulled out my compass. Snap of a branch, the distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind weaving through the pines. Each time I woke, I'd glance upward, and the North Star would still be there, steady as a promise. When the first hint of dawn arrived, pale and silver through the trees, Dan was already up, stamping warmth into his boots. "You ready?" he asked, grinning through his breath fog. "Let's see if those stars were right." We broke camp just as the forest began to blush with early light. The fire was down to ash and a few glowing coals, which we scattered before shouldering our packs again. The air was crisp, the kind that bites your lungs a little and makes every breath feel cleaner than the last. Above us, the sky was streaked with soft pinks and silvers, and the first true warmth of morning glowed on the treetops. "East," I said, pointing toward the rising sun. "Trailheads that way, give or take." Dan grinned, tightening his pack straps. "Give or take," he repeated, like a small prayer to the woods themselves. We hiked in silence for the first hour, saving our breath for the uphill stretches. The forest seemed friendlier in the daylight, though still wild and unknowable. We passed clusters of birch, their pale bark catching the sunlight, and patches of ferns that sparkled with dew. Every so often we'd pause, listening for something human, maybe the distant hum of a road or the clink of another hiker's poles. But there was nothing except the endless rhythm of the woods. That quiet can play tricks on you if you let it. It makes you think too much, replay every decision that brought you there. By mid-morning, we reached a ridge that looked vaguely familiar. I remembered the shape of a split pine near the top, lightning-scarred and leaning like it had been frozen mid-fall. "I swear we passed that yesterday," Dan said. "If we did, then the trail should run below it." We scrambled up the slope, using roots for handholds, until the ground levelled into a stretch of open rock. From up there, we could see miles of rolling forest, stitched with ribbons of mist where the valleys still held morning fog. It was beautiful and cruel all at once, because somewhere in that endless green, sliding on loose soil. The trees grew taller, straighter, and the undergrowth thinned, a sign we might be nearing lower elevations. I felt a flicker of hope when I spotted an old blaze on a trunk, faint, almost swallowed by bark, but definitely man-made. Dan saw it too, and we just looked at each other, half afraid to believe it. We followed the markings, one, then another, like breadcrumbs back toward civilization. By noon, the forest opened into a familiar clearing, a wide, grassy saddle between two hills. Dan let out a long breath, then started laughing. That kind of giddy, disbelieving laugh that comes when you realise you've been holding tension for hours. "We're close," he said. "I can feel it." I wanted to believe him, and deep down I did. But the woods weren't done with us yet. The relief of that clearing carried us for another mile or so, our pace quickening, talk returning to lighter things, cold beers, hot meals, soft seats. But soon, the blazes disappeared again, swallowed by age or neglect, and the faint path we'd been following dissolved into leaves and shadows. Dan stopped, turning in a slow circle. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked. I was. Nothing but forest. Endless and indifferent. The high from our discovery faded as quickly as it had come. We didn't panic. Seasoned hikers rarely do right away. But there was a quiet shift between us. A shared look that said we both knew we weren't out yet. I took a deep breath, feeling the wind across my cheek. It was steady, cool, coming from the northwest. "Trail heads east, right?" I said. "If the wind's blowing off the lake, we keep it on our left." Dan nodded, his jaw tight. But he trusted the logic, so we pressed on, watching the shadows slide across the ground, measuring time by the sun and direction by the whisper of the wind. By late afternoon, the light softened again, slanting through the trees in long amber streaks. The terrain began to flatten, the soil turning sandy beneath. All day, I felt something close to peace. The frustration, the fatigue, even the fear, all of it faded into a kind of reverence. We hadn't conquered the wilderness. We'd simply learned, again, how small we really were in it. Before we left, I walked back to the tree line, taking one last look. The wind had died down, the world calm now, as if the mountain were already forgetting our clumsy intrusion. I thought about how easily we'd lost our tools, technology and paper, and how quickly the old ways had come back to us when they were gone. The sun, the stars, the water's flow, the feel of the land beneath our boots. All the guidance we'd ever needed had been there the whole time. Back in the truck, with the engine humming and the map spread uselessly across the dash, Dan laughed and said, "Guess we found our way the hard way." I smiled. "Yeah," I said, watching the road wind home through the fading light. "But maybe the hard way's the one that sticks."